All right. Okay, we're live. We're starting recording the this is the Halloween special of the That Chapter podcast. As you can see, you were joined for this Halloween by myself, Mike, the devil. Sorry, no mics here. And I'm joined by
Puritan Keith.
Giles Corey. We'll stone him to death later. And then Puritan Wench, also known as the Warthog.
Good day.
Exactly. So we're Keith. What are we talking about today?
Talk about Salem.
Finally. Yeah, exactly. So Keith, he would never shut the hell up about Salem, as you all fully well know at this point. So we finally just decided, for Halloween, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it loud. We're going to do it proud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so we can finally get it out of his system. So he will shut up talking about it once and for all.
Yeah, we'll see.
He won't. I know he's going to keep inserting it somehow into future episodes. But you know what? We're going to do it, and we said we would do it proper. So last year, us three, Regina, Mike, and Keith, we were in Salem.
We were, yeah.
Shortly after Halloween. We went around, we were exploring, we went to see the sites where all those innocent people were brutally killed. It was great. All the stuff that's on the tourist brochure. And so, we filmed it. So I guess what it would have looked like. Something similar to this. Maybe without the swings and buildings and houses. Not sure if the big water tank was there during witch trials either, but you never know.
The rusted swings definitely adds a haunted element to it, doesn't it?
Yeah. So this is Gallows Hill, I guess, where absolutely nothing happened. Alright, so ladies and gentlemen, ghouls and goblins, we're finally doing it. We're doing an episode about the Salem witch trials, which, as we said, is just to get Keith to finally shut the hell up about it. So, funnily enough, while the witch hunts in Europe were actually winding down, the Salem witch trials were only getting started in 1692. And over the course of about 9-ish months, over 200 people were accused of practicing witchcraft. There were confessions, denials, trials, and in the end, 30 were found guilty. We have a Puritan here and a Puritan here. Let's see where the end of this episode.
I mean,
who will be dead?
What?
And will I take in your soul?
What do you think?
I can assure you, I will be well hung.
Hey. 19 of them were executed by hanging. One man died under torture after refusing to enter a plea, and at least 5 others perished in the disease-ridden jails. The record-keeping throughout the Salem witch trials of 1692 was relatively thorough for its time. Thanks to court transcripts, warrants, petitions, and personal diaries and letters, we have a pretty good day-to-day account of what happened during this tumultuous period. And shout out to the Salem Witch Trials, a day-to-day chronicle of a community under siege. And shout out to me for giving that to Keith, who did all the research for
It was
this
an
episode.
excellent read.
Yeah, exactly. You're welcome. The trials have sparked countless books and research, inspiring scholars, filmmakers, fiction writers, and more. I was thinking about this earlier. It's sort of interesting why Salem has become the most famous witch incident in history, especially compared to European witch hunts, because in the Salem witch hunts, there was relatively little death.
Yes.
Yeah.
Compared to most of the ones in
definitely.
Germany, Scandinavia, and Hungary.
I think there was one in Bamberg, there was 900 people burned for witchcraft.
I
Yeah.
don't know what the period of time it took, but they really went for it, alright.
Yeah.
There was no burnings at the stake
Yeah.
in Salem, which is what you always associate witchcraft as burning people at the stake.
Yeah.
None of that. The victims were hung, and even then the witchcraft that during the trials the people were accused of, it was like witchcraft light. It was diet witchcraft.
Yeah,
it was like compared to, evil witches in Europe where it was deep dark woods, there was cannibalism, killing babies, poisons, murder, sex with the devil,
Yeah.
all the good stuff, all the key, the top bits.
This was real petty shit.
Yeah, it was by Puritan imagination witchcraft. It was PG-13 witchcraft, really, compared to
much,
hardcore European.
My butter won't churn.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Witches at it again, killer. However, despite this vast catalogue of literature and films and the diligent record-keeping during the trials themselves, we are still not 100% sure about the exact reasons behind the Salem witch trials. That is, if you discount the actual witchcraft which was happening. Which I think you both are.
Yeah.
Okay, there was no witches then, fine. Okay, theories range from mass hysteria to ergot poisoning, but let's be honest, the real culprit? This guy, the devil himself. The devil was at work. The witches were among us. So let's give it a go.
Let's do it. sometimes it is the clearest explanation.
It is. I
Yeah.
mean, if you hear witches,
It's the simplest
think
explanation.
witches. Yeah.
It is what it
It's
is.
the obvious one.
So before diving into the story, I think that it's important that we set the stage by looking at the world that these people lived in. So understanding the hardships and the mindset of the time may help to somewhat explain the hysteria and how it could have swept through Salem so quickly. So in February of 1692, when all this began, the villagers of Salem, they were emerging from this long and brutal winter. But beyond the unforgiving weather, these Puritan settlers from England, they were also grappling with political and religious turmoil that only fueled their anxieties. So a few years earlier, in 1684, so King Charles II, he revoked the charter that had allowed Massachusetts Bay Colony to govern itself. So this charter had given the Puritans the independence to create a society rooted in their strict religious beliefs. However, the new charter of 1691, which was issued by King William III, that weakened the Puritan control by mandating this greater religious tolerance, something the Puritans, they feckin' hated.
Yeah.
So, like, exactly, yeah, like they'd crossed the pond to build this pure community free from royal interference, and now they felt their power was slipping away. Worse still, they no longer had free reign to persecute those pesky other sects like the Quakers and the Baptists who they saw as heretics. So adding to the political and religious unrest was the stress of the ongoing warfare. So not long before the witch trials, the region had absolutely been ravaged by King Philip's War. That lasted between 16... I'm like looking up... It's written here. Between I think it is right there. Between 1675 and 1676. So, and this was like it was a short enough, like just over a year, and it was a devastating conflict between Native Americans and English settlers. So, from the Puritans' perspective, the war had been absolutely catastrophic. It destroyed a third of New England's towns, it wrecked the economy. It claimed 10% of the adult male population. The villages, they were left in ruins. There was brutal tactics on both sides. Native American warriors, they launched these surprise raids, burning settlements and killing or kidnapping settlers. So for the people of Salem, this left as deep psychological scars, and many had lost loved ones or they knew someone who had been killed or taken captive.
Yeah.
So by 1692, when the whole trials were beginning, they were on edge again as King William's War had just broken out. So the Native American and French forces, they were now launching raids on English settlements. And the Wakambi Confederation, who they'd allied with the French, they were attacking the frontier and attacking an already traumatized people from the King Philip's War. So they basically just felt like this was the war part 2.
It was just like a never-ending war, basically. So you're always under attack. You're always under threat.
Yeah. There was
invasion.
on edge.
Pesky French.
There was on edge the whole time.
The Wabanaki.
Yeah. Like anytime they looked out, like they seen like a shadow move, it was like, I'm going to be killed right now.
Yeah.
So
just people like murdered, scalped, dragged away into slavery. All sorts
never
of
seen
stuff.
again.
Yeah.
So with the harsh winters, political power slipping away, the rising religious tensions, and the constant threat of brutal conflict, it's easy to see why the people of Salem were so on edge. Oh, and also let's not forget that smallpox was also regularly sweeping through the colony of New England, and that killed 3 out of 10 infected people as well. So in such a charged and paranoid atmosphere, it wouldn't take much to spark hysteria.
Also, witchcraft wasn't unheard of in New England at the time. The very first person to be executed for witchcraft in the colonies was Alice Young in May of 1647. Her death was the first in Connecticut's witch trials, which lasted until 1697. During the decade, more than 40-odd cases were recorded, with 17 people executed. And even just 4 years before the Salem witch trials, in 1688, Anne Goody Glover, who was an Irish woman, she was hanged as a witch in Boston. She was accused by her employer, stonemason John Goodwin, after 4 of his children fell ill. Even though she knew English, she refused to speak anything but Gaelic at her trial. Good woman.
Yeah.
And she was convicted and publicly hanged. The Irish at it again.
Yeah.
She was also Catholic, which was kind of a no-no in
There you
Puritan
go. Yeah,
New
that's
England.
more like it.
And Reverend Cotton Mather, who was later become a key part of the Salem witch trials, he was instrumental in Anne Glover getting executed, hung in Boston only 4 years earlier. So now let's get into the Salem witch trials themselves. So, first of all, as well, the spark came in the form of Samuel Parris, who was the minister. It always starts with the ministers.
Yeah, men in power and the very tippity top, they have to be the ones that popping everything up.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Absolutely. Yes, exactly. Kind of the poison drips outward from there. So he was the minister of Salem Village, and as well the difference between Salem Village and there's Salem Town. Salem Town is modern day Salem, which is a port town. And then Salem Village is modern-day Danvers. But they're originally kind of in cahoots, and then they separated over the years.
Show them on the map right
I'll show them on the map right now. So before, a little bit of backstory about Samuel Parris, the minister of Salem. So before entering the ministry, Parris had tried his hand at running a sugar plantation in Barbados, and later ventured into business in Boston. When both efforts failed, he turned to the ministry, as one does, but he's literally... like a person.
Nothing left for him. He was
no.
like, I fucked up in this and that. What should I do?
That's exactly it. He fucked up at every business he had, and then he was like, I guess I'll just become a minister.
Yeah.
It's like,
I still want power. What should I do? Minister.
Yeah, literally that was it. It's like, how could you fuck up running a sugar plantation?
I know,
it's a license to print money in Barbados at the time. And then just running a business at a port city of Boston, which was like one of the biggest ports in America at the time. And he was like, he shit at everything, basically.
Spoiler alert, he fucks us up too.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So in 1689, Parris became Salem Village's 4th minister in just 16 years. And as you can imagine, back in the day, there wasn't really much, job mobility. So Salem's 4th minister in just 16 years, which was a telling sign of how difficult this small Puritan community was to manage, especially considering ministers, as we said, were typically expected to serve for life. Salem Village was rife with tension. Its people were divided over religious disputes, land ownership, and petty squabbles. In one case, a man was accused of horse theft, when in reality he had only borrowed the horse from his neighbor without asking because his pregnant wife was in labor, and he had no other way to get to the midwife. After 3 meetings, the man finally apologized, which, funnily enough, that was all that was required for him. So on the top of the political, religious, and wartime pressures of the time, villagers were also constantly at odds with each other and incredibly spiteful. That is something to note about the peoples of New England. They were quarrelsome, litigious people.
Big time.
Yeah, there's far too much for us to go through this in this episode, but there were a lot of lawsuits, will arguments, and other such like that during the times of the trials, which are kind of like a backdrop to this entire thing. They were also very drunk. They were mad for the frickin' grog. A visitor from England was touring Boston and New England at the time, and he said Bostonians were the drunkest people he ever saw. I think in Salem Town, not in Salem Village, but I mean, it's close enough, there was like one pub for every 80 people. Which is like, that's a lot of pubs. So Samuel Parris himself did little to ease this tension. It took him nearly a year to negotiate his salary and benefits, including the amount of firewood he would receive, which frustrated many villagers. Now, firewood sounds unimportant about how valuable and how big a deal him not getting the firewood was, but it was also very, very cold at the time. So firewood would literally be life or death to these people. So there's a lot of arguments. And in fact, that was one of the reasons why a lot of the previous ministers had left, was because of firewood. They were just arguing over firewood, that the villagers give me more firewood, and villagers would refuse.
I mean, of course they would refuse as well. Who would want to go out into the forest where you could get scalped in 2 seconds? So you wouldn't go out there that often or for that long. So you could collect certain amount and then that was it. Plus, like in that kind of situation, you're already freaked out, you're cold as hell, not enough food, not enough anything, and then of course you're bickering with each other over everything. I mean, think about when you're hangry. You get triggered over
That's
like
actually
the
a good
smallest
point.
little thing. So like, of course they were like that to each other.
Honestly, most historical disputes could just come down to everybody just being hangry. Till you mention
Hangry
not a
cold.
refrigerator.
Yeah.
You know?
Regina has solved all the previous conflicts before the
History,
fridge.
We know, we understand history, finally. So this emphasis on securing personal gain was seen as unbecoming for a Puritan minister, especially in a community that valued humility and self-sacrifice. Now, the first afflicted. Now we're getting into the real shit, ladies and gentlemen. Now it's time to strike. It was Parris's own household that the witchcraft hysteria first took rot. Living with Samuel Parris was his wife, Elizabeth Parris, his 9-year-old daughter, Elizabeth Betty Parris, and his 11-year-old niece, Abigail Williams, and 2 enslaved individuals, Tituba and her husband, John Indian. It was in the January of 1692 that Abigail Williams first began exhibiting strange fits and behaviors. Shortly after, her cousin and good friend Betty Paris started displaying the same symptoms. The girls complained of being bitten and pinched by invisible agents. They barked and yelped, fell into silent trances, and their bodies alternated between spasms and going limp. This continued until late February, during which Samuel Paris and his wife tried one home remedy after another to ease the girls' ailments, but nothing seemed to work.
Oh yeah, and like this was a time when medical innovation was a truly cutting edge. So some of the leading medical men of the colonies, they believed in the following remedies. So 60 drops of lavender and a mouthful of gingerbread cured memory loss, if I remember correctly.
Very nice. That's the classic Keith humor we kind of enjoy.
Then there was also frog liver powder. So this was administered 5 times daily, and that helped with epilepsy. And then for hysteria, you simply needed to brew the breast milk and blood from an amputated tomcat's ear to sort you right out.
How tasty, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right?
These
Yeah.
concoctions, they ate a type of moss that grows on a skull when left.
Okay.
in
Well,
the
don't knock it till you tried it.
Yeah, right.
You know?
I'm sorry,
Moss
yeah,
that
it
grows
might
on
be
skulls.
the best thing ever. I don't know.
Who knows?
But that's something else. And then, yeah, they were drinking fresh blood from people as well as a cure for stuff. But
So eventually, the Parises called for their local doctor, William Griggs, who diagnosed the girls as being, quote, under an evil hand. Although I would take what Griggs said with a pinch of salt, as the man could read but could not write. See,
How did they write prescriptions? Like,
exactly, yeah.
have you seen Signatures
Scratches,
of Dogs
yeah.
nowadays?
oh, that's true, actually. Yeah, he was the original. Yeah.
Yeah. See, witchcraft was not believed to be the cause just yet, though. The Parises then decided to get a second opinion, so they called over a few neighbours to basically just... What you think?
Have you seen this
Have a
shit
look at
before?
it. Have a look at it. And then they continued just to basically look at their kids spasming on the floor and see what they thought. However, the general consensus eventually grew and grew that the girls were indeed bewitched.
There was one evening when Mr. and Mrs. Paris, they'd gone out. So Tituba, under the instruction of a concerned neighbour, made a cake. However, this was not just any ordinary cake. This was a witch cake. What you got to do now? So this cake, it wasn't intended to do harm. So on the contrary, its purpose was to help identify the one responsible for tormenting the girls. So the recipe, it was pretty straightforward. You got rye meal mixed with the afflicted's urine, and then this mixture was then baked in hot ashes or an air fryer. You had one? 250 minutes.
Nice.
You could use that too. But once it was cooked, it was then fed to the dog,
Dog.
and then you
I
just
know, forcing the dog to eat that is like, it's pretty shitty.
They eat everything. He's
Yeah.
probably just done eating his own shit. Like.
Yeah.
So then after it's fed to the dog, you basically just wait and the witch would reveal itself. So unfortunately, this had the opposite effect, and instead of finding the witch, it opened the girls' eyes to the invisible world, allowing them to see their tormentors. And by the time that Mr. and Mrs. Paris got home, the girls, they were in worse shape than ever.
That was really the incident which...
Nice.
God.
ignited the idea that there was witches in the area. As the girls' pain intensified, Samuel Paris invited neighbouring ministers into his home to witness their suffering firsthand. Basically, if you were passing through Salem, probably on your way to Boston or out of town, you'd stop by Salem Village and be like... As the ministers watched the girls contort in pain and struggle to breathe, Betty and Abigail managed to accuse Tituba, their servant, of causing their torment, claiming it worsened after she had made the witch cake. The men questioned Tituba, who denied being a witch. However, she explained that the woman who had previously owned her had been a witch and had taught her methods for identifying and preventing magical harm. A mile in either direction from the Paris household, 2 other girls in the village also became afflicted. Anne Putnam, the daughter of Thomas and Anne Putnam Sr., and Elizabeth Hubbard, the niece of the semi-illiterate Dr. William Griggs, who could not write prescriptions, it appears. And fun fact, for those of you who love your American Revolutionary history as I do, Thomas Putnam Sr. are the aunt and uncle of famous General Israel Putnam, who was the commander at the Battle of Bunker Hill and had the famous quote, "Don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes," though a few people actually claim to say that. Israel Putnam was born in Salem Village in 1718, so 30 years after this, but that's just a little by the by. So like the Paris girls, Anne Putnam Jr. claimed she was being tormented by a spectre that identified herself as Sarah Good, while Elizabeth Hubbard said she was harassed by the spirit of Sarah Osborne. As we will see going forward, the Salem witch trials began by targeting individuals who were already marginalized, and both Good and Osborne fit this profile. Good was a poor and destitute woman who often begged for food and shelter from her neighbors, while Osborne's social standing deteriorated greatly after she scandalously married her servant following the death of her first husband. Even worse, her new husband was Irish.
Oh no.
So concerned that the four girls' conditions were worsening, Anne Putnam's father, Thomas, travelled to Salem town and swore official complaints before magistrates John Hawthorne and Jonathan Corwin. Now, these two guys, Hawthorne and Corwin, will be key going forward. Think of these two, they're like the inquisitors sent to... straighten things out. What?
Yeah, the Spanish.
Oh, I said inquisin. I don't know that first.
Yeah. I'm sure I was going to say that. Hawthorne is a famous Salem name. Nathaniel Hawthorne is a famous American writer. Nathaniel Hawthorne most famously wrote The Scarlet Letter, and in town is the Hawthorne Hotel, which we filmed at last year. Let me play a clip right now. It's haunted, allegedly.
Ew.
Actually, I start recording the second later.
Oh, okay.
Here we go. What do you think of our room?
It's definitely a lot bigger than mine.
Yeah, there's a lot of room for activities here, I feel.
Yeah, it's creepy.
It's very creepy.
Yeah, it is. It is very creepy. Do we know who's like meant to be haunting this hotel?
Not that I'm aware of. Just ghosts. It's just haunted.
Just general.
Just general ghosts.
I wonder if they know my ghosts. Like, distant relatives.
Of your haunted house? Keith's haunted house?
Our haunted house. Yes, I think like Bridge Bishop, she's meant to be one of the ghosts haunting the hotel.
Ooh.
I think the hotel is on because she owned an orchard.
Yeah.
So I think the hotel's like apparently on her orchard.
Oh, you were saying, yeah, that it's like you if you wake up and smell apples or whatever.
The ghost is there.
Is that even a door?
There's no door.
I know, right? What's it there? That's weird. Maybe that's where the ghosts live. Ghost dog. That's so loud. You know, I'm starting to think ghosts aren't even fucking real, then. I'm fucking pissed off about this.
Wow, what a great clip. Also, the famous Salem Witch House, which is still there today. That was where Jonathan Corwin, he lived. That was his gaff, which is a very famous place in Salem. So you got these two, Hawthorne and Corwin. Yeah. They charged Sarah Good, Tituba, and Sarah Osborne on suspicion of witchcraft. Arrest warrants were issued, and with that, the first 3 people were brought in for questioning in connection with the Salem witch trials. Sarah, and Tituba were Salem's first witches.
So on the 1st of March 1692, the hearings for the 3 suspected witches that you mentioned were set to take place in Salem's town meeting house. However, before that, all 3 women, they were first examined at Ingersoll's Tavern, and they were looking for the infamous Mark of the Witch. So this was a practice pulled straight from the playbook of medieval Europe, and this idea was deeply rooted in Christian demonology, particularly during the witch hunts of the 15th to 17th centuries. So the belief was that witches, they had familiars, which were small demon-like animals that they'd serve them. And these familiars, they would supposedly feed off the witch's blood through the mark, which was also called the witch's teeth. So the or tip, yeah. The witch's teeth did. So the familiar could take the form of a cat or a dog or just some weird little small creature. It could be anything. Like I seen ones before. I was like, oh shit, there was an ant on her. I was like, that's familiar. Yeah. The mark itself, that could literally be anything. It was like a blemish, a mole, a wart, a scar, just any sort of irregularity on the skin was considered the witch's mark. So basically every single person in the world has the witch's mark if you've lived at all. So during the examination, Sarah Good's husband, William Good, he'd actually stopped by the tavern, although he wasn't there to support his wife. So instead, he informed the inspectors that he had noticed a wart just below his wife's shoulder the other night. So he just wanted to let them know, just in case they missed it, you know? Yeah.
So the hearing had actually been scheduled to take place in Ingersoll's Tavern after the examinations. However, word of the witch accusations had spread, and by the time Hawthorne and Jonathan Corwin actually arrived in Salem Village, a large crowd had gathered, necessitating a move to a nearby meeting house. Under normal circumstances, Hawthorne and Corwin would have been in Boston representing Salem in court. However, until the new charter mentioned earlier could be put into effect, higher government matters were suspended, leaving local magistrates to handle the preliminary stages of legal action. Now, although Hawthorne and Corwin lacked what you might call, you nerds, Michael, formal legal training, they made up for it with their wealth as prominent merchants. So what could possibly go wrong? And that's actually an interesting point as to how all this could happen and why it happened in Salem. In Europe at the time, magistrates, they were trained in the law. They were very experienced. In Salem, New England, they were winging it.
You just got your way in, that was it.
Yeah, exactly. They were just wealthy merchants. They didn't have any legal training, so they could sort of just make it up as they went along. And being very spiritual people, they just thought this was the right thing to do. Like, it is important to note as well, these people truly did believe in witches and the devil. I mean, there was like land grabs, lawsuits, personal grudges were a big part of this, but they did also think they were in a fight for their souls. Like, it wasn't just cynically using this as like a shield, spirituality and all that shit as a shield. So Sarah Good was the first to be questioned by the magistrates, and all 4 afflicted girls, Betty Paris, Abigail Williams, Anne Putnam, and Elizabeth Hubbard, were present, visibly unsettled and appeared to be in discomfort, as Good was brought in.
Now, the 4 girls, though, so during the winter of 1691 and 1692, so, that winter period anyways.
Yeah, just before.
The 4 girls were in the habit of meeting at Mr. Paris's house for the purpose of practicing the art of fortune telling.
Oh, okay.
And become experts in the wonders of necromancy, magic, and spiritualism.
So immediately, Sarah Good was bombarded with leading questions like, why do you hurt these children? And what evil spirit do you have familiarity with? Good professed that she was falsely accused, but with this denial, the 4 afflicted girls were noted in the records as all dreadfully tortured and tormented. In response, Hawthorne snapped at Good, demanding to know why she continued to torment these poor children. Again, Good denied these accusations, but the afflicted girls cried out and writhed in pain. This back and forth continued until Hawthorne asked, if not you, then who is tormenting these girls? Seeking a way out and hoping to shift the blame, Good, knowing that Osborne had also been accused, suggested that Osborne was tormenting the girls. Like, they would often do that. I'm not the witch, but somebody else is. I mean, they would have thought as well that was the right thing to do, because they believe in witches also.
Yeah.
So while you were not a witch, maybe she actually was a witch. And all of these, this party accusations were taking place in this meeting house that was very dark. I don't think it had windows. And there was it was a very small place, and there was dozens of people in it. So you would have been as close as you and I are from the person who's accusing you. Like in movies you see it in a church with pews. It wasn't like that. Like, you were in a room like this.
Sardines.
Yeah, they were crammed in there like sardines. You could have touched the accusers easily at any stage. So at this point, after Good accused Sarah Osborne of actually being a witch, the afflicted girls seemed to recover slightly, only to clarify that it was Osborne and Good who were hurting them.
Well,
that didn't work out. Shit. With this, the court agreed to hold Sarah Good in jail until her trial. She was sent to prison with her infant child in her arms.
Good's husband, William, so he's back again.
Oh, God.
So
Did you catch her?
you saw the wart, right? Okay, good. So he was present during the hearing, and Hawthorne, he did ask him if he had noticed anything suspicious to indicate that his wife may have been a witch. And William responded by saying that, in general, she had bad carriage towards him, and that she was also an enemy to all good. So he basically just took the opportunity to be like, my wife's a bitch.
Yeah. So Sarah Osborne was next to be questioned. Despite being an elderly woman, well, she was 49 in 1692, but she may as well have been dead. That was back in those days. She was also in very poor health, and her experience was much the same as Sarah Good's. Leading questions were posed, and the afflicted girls screamed in pain. When accused of having her spectre torment the girls, Osborne rebuked the claim, saying, I do not know that the devil goes about in my likeness to do any hurt. She was the first, but not the last, to protest the reliability of the spectral evidence provided by the afflicted that only the afflicted could actually see. But I mean, hey, listen, I don't see anything wrong with it. However, the afflicted girls insisted that the spectre tormenting them looked exactly like Sarah Osborne and was even wearing the same clothes she had on that day, which is pretty rock solid evidence. Right there. What's she wearing? What you're wearing?
Yeah.
What you're wearing right now?
Same as every day.
Yeah.
Black. It's always black. So at this point, I think it's worth clarifying that what spectral evidence is. So because it played such a huge role in the Salem witch trials. So we've mentioned this before in other podcast episodes, like the Greenbrier Ghost, the Hammer of Witches, and also the Maddie Hopkins episode.
Maddie Hoppy.
It's good ass dude.
Which, if you haven't listened to the episodes yet, I'd highly suggest
Do
go
listen.
back.
I'm available on all podcast platforms.
Yeah.
Folks.
And it's actually kind of like a prequel to this episode.
Yeah.
So spectral evidence, it refers to a type of testimony used during the Salem witch trials and other witch hunts in the late 16th and 17th century, where witnesses claim to have seen a spirit or a spectre of a person committing acts of witchcraft. So this form of evidence, it was super controversial and was based on the idea that witches, they could send out their spirits to harm others while their physical bodies, they stayed put. So basically, people could accuse other people of pretty much anything they wanted to and claim that this was spectral.
And so, even with Sarah Osborne protesting the reliability of spectral evidence, the court felt there was still enough strangeness there to also hold Sarah Osborne in jail until trial. So
yeah, I love how they believe it was a 9, an 11, a 12, and a 17-year-old girl who are saying they see shit. And that there's this grown-ass woman, part of the community for all these years or whatever, and they question her instead of the girls.
Next to face the ruthless questioning was Tituba. Her testimony during this interrogation played a crucial role in shaping the course of the Salem witch trials, significantly intensifying the hysteria and escalating the witch hunt. As Tituba was led into the meeting house, the afflicted girls began to scream and cry in pain, and she was, once again, immediately bombarded with leading questions and accusations. Under pressure, Tituba confessed to being approached by the devil, who asked her to serve him. The exact reason for her confession remains unclear. It could have been the result of coercion and fear of punishment, a strategic attempt to deflect suspicion by implicating others, or perhaps she simply caved to the intense pressure, telling them what they wanted to hear in hopes of mercy, and she likely had been coached in a lot of what she would say. Whatever her motivations, once she started giving the court the answers they were looking for, the afflicted girls appeared to settle, as her confession validated their claims. Well, I don't know what more proof you need. Although the immediate chaos seemed to subside, Tituba's testimony didn't stop there. She continued to tell a tale that confirmed the Puritans' worst fears. That the devil was actively present amongst them and that witches were at work in Salem. Tituba went on to tell the court that she'd not only seen the specters of Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne hurting the children, but she'd also witnessed the specters of two unknown women. They were accompanied by a tall man dressed in black.
You wish.
I'm 5'10", 5'11" on every day. Who's also sometimes appeared as a large black dog. This man threatened to hurt her if she did not assist in tormenting the children. Tituba explained that these evil figures had familiars, animals like yellow birds. Yellow birds is kind of a recurring theme. Or cats. Black cat, perchance. That would pinch and force her, Tituba, to harm the girls, specifically Betty and Abigail. The devil, by the way, it's usually depicted in this time as a man dressed in black. See, black at the time, back in the 1600s, black clothing was considered very expensive. Dyeing of black was very expensive, so it was kind of considered like formal wear.
Yeah.
If you look at paintings, though, from these periods, like Rembrandt and like the Dutch people, Dutch masters, they're usually wearing black. Because that would have been rich folks. So the devil appears as this rich man offering these Puritan women expensive clothing, food, jewelry, as it said in the movie The Witch. Would they like to live deliciously?
Oh yes, please.
Tempting the women
after
with
starving and all that shit, yes please. I'm all for it.
But once again, it's like he's just come and tempting them, and it's it still is like witchcraft light. You know,
It is,
there was no like they were having sex with the devil. There's none of that. There was no murdering
no
children,
blood
killing
sacrifice,
babies.
anything like that.
Blood sacrifices. Any of that stuff. It was like no.
Even like
he just pinched me. You know?
that was the afflicted. Oh, he pinched me out. Yeah.
As a final shocking revelation, Tituba described how the devil had brought her a pin to draw blood from herself and sign his book, what she referred to as the Devil's book. She claimed she had refused to sign, but had seen 9 other signatures already written inside the devil's book. So, for the people of Salem hearing this was the ultimate confirmation of their worst fears. Not only were there real witches amongst them, one of whom had just confessed and they had heard it with their very own ears, but there were others, still unknown, who had already made a pact with the devil. 9 others, to be specific.
Wow.
So the idea that a secret hidden conspiracy of witches, there was an active witches' coven in their community, and so that sent the entire town into a deeper panic and fueled the flames of hysteria that opened the door for many more accusations and arrests to follow. That was literally the moment, like, the killer is already inside the house moment in this entire story, and it went from 3 accused witches to hundreds of accused
because now
witches.
they went for anyone and everyone, seriously.
And this is kind of how things went for a while. This became the pattern. So accusations, official complaints, hearings, and then swift imprisonments. They followed one another. So, and then Salem had slipped into a rhythm of hysteria. And as the number of accused grew, so did the number of afflicted. So the courts, they were overwhelmed and by this ever-expanding list of suspects, and they began to operate almost mechanically. So accusations were quickly followed by examinations and interrogations with leading questions. And then in most cases, the afflicted, they would cry out in agony, resulting in yet another innocent person being sent to an overcrowded, disease-ridden jail. And it really can't be overstated how terrible these jails were. There was one visiting Englishman, and he described them at the time as suburbs of hell. And it was one of these jails where during the summer it was too hot, like it was like they'd be boiled alive, and then during the winter it was like ice. It was like an ice box frozen. And when he went in as well, it's not like a jail cell now. There was like they were chained to the wall with these big heavy iron chains, and they weren't like a lock. Basically, when you were chained, a blacksmith came in and like he put it on you, and then if you wanted to get out of it, a blacksmith had to come back again and get it off again.
Oh,
So
wow.
They didn't exactly have keys back then.
now, at first, the accused were people on the fringes of society. The poor, the elderly, women who didn't fit the strict Puritan mould. And what started as a witch hunt had transformed into a purge of anyone considered different or out of place.
Yeah, free for all.
Exactly, yeah. By the end of March, however, the list of accused had doubled, and it wasn't just the vulnerable or outcasts being targeted anymore. So respected, devout members of the church were falling under suspicion, and even men were being accused.
Even men?
I know, even men!
Not the
Okay, now it's getting serious, guys. Now, okay.
It was all fun and games beforehand. But yeah, the witch trials, they had morphed into something far more terrifying. A wave of paranoia where no one, no matter the status, was safe.
Now, it is impossible for us to cover every single accusation and hearing. We'd need an entire series just to go through the 200 people who were accused by the end, but I think it's worth highlighting a few of the newly afflicted and some of the accused to give you a sense of just how far Salem had gone off the deep end. And Putnam Jr. continued to be plagued by the spectres. One was of an unknown woman, and then there was also Sarah Good's daughter, Dorcas Good. Even though Dorcas was only about 4 or 5 years old, Anne alleged that she was pinched and choked viciously as the little devil, tried to get her to sign the devil's book. Dorcas, by the way, would later admit to being a witch, and again, she was like a child. And then she would also say her mother was a witch too. Bridget Bishop was largely accused due to her unconventional lifestyle. Outspoken and married 3 times, she had a contentious relationship with her neighbours. Many accusations against her came from local youths. The youths, even back then, the youths were at it, including the afflicted girls like Abigail Williams. Elizabeth Proctor, the 3rd wife of John Proctor, who was played by Daniel Day-Lewis in The Crucible, was identified as the unknown spectre that tortured poor Anne Putnam Jr. Elizabeth was the granddaughter of a woman who had been tried and acquitted of witchcraft 30 years earlier, which may have sparked these suspicions against her. She was, a descendant of a witch. Mary Warren, a servant to John and Elizabeth Proctor, initially claimed to see the spectres also. However, John Proctor, he quickly sorted that out. He kept her busy with work and threatened to beat 7 shades of shite out of her if she saw any more spectres, and it actually worked.
Yeah.
There you go.
For a little bit. Unfortunately, after John Proctor himself was accused, Mary Warren, no longer getting the shit kicked out of her, she became afflicted somehow once again, and she joined Ann Putnam Jr. and the newly afflicted, another person named Mercy Lewis, who was a servant in the Putnam household, in accusing another woman, Martha Corey.
It's like telephone.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. It was telephone. When Martha Corey was accused, it was quite shocking. See, Martha, she was a well-respected and devout member of the church, and the timing was questionable after she had just publicly expressed skepticism about the legitimacy of the witchcraft accusations. Ooh, they didn't like that one, Martha.
Are we doing the right thing here? She's a witch!
Yeah. Martha was also the wife of Giles Corey, who was a bit of a bastard man. Something about beating a man to death a few years back over firewood. But anyway, he would also be accused, Giles himself would be accused of witchcraft. Now, there was a long-standing feud between the Putnams and the Coreys over land in Salem Village, but of course that had nothing to do with the accusations that they were basically accusing each other of being witches. And Giles Corey, he'll get his. That's for sure. Rebecca Nurse, another pious and elderly woman, she was also accused. This was shocking to many, as Nurse, 71 years of age, back in 1692, 71 may as well be like 200.
Yeah,
and she was a mother of 8. She came from one of the most respected families in Salem. Her house still stands in Danvers to this day as well. However, once the accusations began, they seemed unstoppable. One of Rebecca Nurse's accusers was actually Ann Putnam Sr., probably because she wasn't a regular mom. She was a cool mom. The most shocking accusation, however, was that, shocking, folks, was that of Reverend George Burroughs, who was the previous minister in Salem before Samuel Parris. That poor fucker wasn't even in Salem anymore. He was in Wells, Maine, which would have been part of Massachusetts back at the time, approximately 70 miles northeast of Salem, and they still sent him in. Dragged him back to downtown Salem Village. Now, George Burroughs is an interesting fella. As we said, he was the previous minister in Salem before Samuel Parris. He was severely disliked by Salemites when he had been their minister. There had been a lot of arguments over pounds, I guess.
Probably
dollar bills.
Accused him anyways.
But no, that was the thing. He left Salem in 1683, moved to Maine, which, as I said, would have been part of Massachusetts back then. And this would have been a frontier as well. So a lot of native attacks, against the French and the Wabanaki and such. And he was sort of a hero there. He saved a lot of lives during one particularly ferocious attack. Apparently, he was kind of like a bit of a hero, warrior, priest kind of type guy. But the Salemites disliked him so much that 9 years after they ran him out of town, they dragged him back. That's how much they hated him, accusing him of being a witch.
Shit started to go down while you were here. You have to be the head of everything.
Literally, he had left like they wanted him to, and they still were like, "Nope, you're not done. We're not done with you."
Remember that guy? Yeah, fuck that guy.
Yeah,
bring
9 years, like almost a decade.
Done with you, yeah. So, for those accused, along with the intense examinations and interrogations, there was also these tests to figure out if they were witches. So, these weren't as dramatic as the witch tests that you might hear about from Europe, like swimming the witch, where you'd tie a woman up and throw her into the water, and if she sank, she was innocent, but just drowned. So, in Salem, instead of these tests, what they used what was called the prayer test. And the idea behind it was witches, they couldn't recite scripture correctly. So the accused had to say parts of the Bible, which was usually the Lord's Prayer, without making a single mistake. But given the pressure of speaking in front of everyone when your life depended on it, and the Puritans' high standards, nobody managed to get it right during the meetings. They always made and it was always small little mistakes, like hallowed be thy name, I don't know which one it is, but they always got it wrong. Those little things. Now, I mentioned earlier that the afflicted, they often cried out in agony during the hearings, but that wasn't always the case. So, interestingly...
the pointer is out again.
Interestingly, the afflicted seemed to be tormented only when the accused denied the accusations. On the flip side, those who confessed were met with silence from the afflicted. So take Abigail Hobbs, for example. She was an edgy 14-year-old who had been saying for the last year that she had sold herself to the devil. When she was accused and brought in, the Afflicted Girls, they didn't make a peep. So they didn't say shit. And even when the magistrates asked her if she had made a pact with the devil, and she said yes, she didn't deny any of the charges. Right. The afflicted, they remained completely silent, as if they were genuinely afraid that she was a witch.
Okay, so when an actual witch believed herself to be an actual witch, shut it. Oh, yeah. She's got real.
Yeah. So without giving away too many spoilers, it's worth noting that none of the individuals who actually admitted to witchcraft during their questioning or trials were executed. This starkly contrasts with the European witch trials. So in Salem, punishment was, and executions, they were reserved for those who denied the accusations, and individuals, they were rewarded by having their life spared by confessing to dancing with the devil.
So as we dive into the trials, it's important to note another chain of events that led up to them. Honestly, this whole situation plays out like something from Final Destination or whatever, with every little occurrence contributing to the impending executions. See, about 2.5 months after the first hearings began, Sir William Phips became governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony on May 14th, 1692. Appointed by the English crown after the colony's previous charter was revoked, he was the first royal governor under the new charter granted by King William III. Now, Phips was another one of those guys who was way underqualified for his job and lacked political experience, because basically, if you were in the Kingdom of England or the royal whatever, if you were well qualified, you didn't go to New England or to America. You went back to England. That's where all the good folks went. If you were talented, you stayed at home. They sent kind of the shit munchers to the colonies, people who couldn't get a good job elsewhere. So Phips was sort of one of those guys. His bread and butter was as a ship captain, and he was also sort of an Indiana Jones type character. As his treasure hunter. Possibly he did, but imagine if Indiana Jones became president of America. That's sort of what happened to him.
That's badass.
He actually is kind of badass, yeah. He gained fame by recovering a massive treasure from a sunken Spanish galleon, weighing in at over 34 tons. That's 34 tons of gold he recovered by himself. Historians argue that this finding significantly impacted history, and it really how Britain became a global power simply by that find alone, and it played a role in the eventual formation of the Bank of England. Wow. So thanks to his treasure hunting success, he became the first New England native to be knighted and the first royally appointed governor. So why am I telling this? Well, Phips' arrival and appointment coincided with the peak of the Salem witch trials, leading him to establish the court of Oyer and Terminer, shortly after taking office to handle the influx of witchcraft cases. So Phips, he basically instituted the court of Oyer and Terminer, which means to hear and determine, due to the overcrowded jails filled with these soon becoming hundreds of accused witches. This court, it had limited jurisdiction, focusing specifically on the witch trials. It wasn't a permanent legal body. Basically, just set up this court specifically for the Salem witch trials to tackle the crisis that had begun in Salem and was quickly spreading to the surrounding towns. It was presided over by Chief Justice William Stoughton. The court also included Justices Hawthorne and Corwin, along with 5 others, all of whom were merchants and landowners by trade. It was the perfect storm because, as you heard, none of them were actually legal.
None of them knew what they were doing at all.
Shinny. So their first witch trials began on June 2nd, 1692 in the 2-story Salem townhouse. So now the witch trials actually moved from Salem Village, Danvers, to Salem. Salem.
Yeah, proper,
The special court of Oyer and Terminer convened. The first person to be tried was Bridget, Bishop of Salem, who faced more accusations of witchcraft than any other defendant. Testimony began with the afflicted, who, under oath, claimed that Bishop's spectre tormented them and urged them to sign the devil's book. Additional testimony came from others who had long held suspicions that Bishop was a witch. These suspicions often arose from personal quarrels that ended in unfortunate outcomes, which many found too coincidental to ignore.
Yeah, exactly.
For example, Bridget's husband, Edward Bishop, once sold a pig to a couple. Instead of taking payment directly, he had them pay a third party to whom he owed money, a decision Bridget openly disagreed with. Soon after, the pig gave birth, but became deaf, blind, and foamed at the mouth when its young tried to nurse. And I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that the witch caused that, obviously. She cursed the pig.
Clearly, yeah.
Obviously. So by the end of the trial, between the spoken evidence and the dramatic courtroom seizures performed by the afflicted, the court found Bridget Bishop guilty. She was sentenced to be executed by hanging, which took place on June 10th. 1692.
So it was only 8 days after the trial that Bridget Bishop, she was taken to Salem prison to be hung as I said, the first person in the Salem witch trials. So before the special court of Oyer and Terminer, all capital cases, they'd been tried in Boston. But now this was happening in Salem, they had a little bit of an issue. There was no official spot to execute the condemned. So officials, they eventually settled on a place just on the edge of town, which we now call Gallows Hill. Now you might think that they did the executions at the top of the hill, but I'm guessing when they arrived with the cart with Bridget inside and they looked up that steep hill, which we walked up when we were there, and it is very fucking steep.
Yeah. Back in the day, you can only imagine how bad it would have been.
I know, carting up a witch up the hill, and they were like,
boy.
Like after rain and everything.
Yeah.
Exactly. In fact, I think here is a clip of us climbing Gallows Hill.
And being on top of it.
Enjoy that.
So yeah, this is I guess what it would have looked like. Something similar to this, maybe without the swings and buildings and houses. Not sure if a big water tank was there during witch trials either, but you never know. There you go. So you can see all the stuff there, all the people working on this. This is it. There's a bin here too.
Recycle as well.
Very important to have a bin at your dead person, accused witch memorial site. Well, Keith, what do you think?
Yeah, it's cool. Like, it's so weird because, like, obviously researched it a lot. Now that I'm here, it's where they hung. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, here's a lot of
And it was brutal death as well.
Oh yeah.
Like, they didn't have it down like they did in England.
Yeah.
Wow, what a great place.
Oh my god.
So
what happened next, Keith?
So when they got there, I'm sure they were like, nah, fuck, well, let's do it here.
We were tired from climbing it ourselves, if you can believe it.
So, and that's what happened. At the bottom of the hill, which is now known as Proctor's Ledge, is where they decided to execute. So they didn't have anything fancy for the hangings, like gallows, like in Europe. Instead, they had a tree and a rope and a ladder. The bare essentials.
Okay.
Now, just a bit of a heads up, what I'm about to describe might be a bit tough to hear. So the execution was far from smooth. So a bit of a trigger warning here. Bridget, she protested her innocence right up until the final terrifying moments. A noose was placed around her neck, her hands were tied behind her back, and she was then blindfolded. They set her halfway up the ladder, and then they pushed her off. So unlike the more humane methods used by the gallows, a quick drop and a sudden stop, and that would break the neck. This was nothing like that. So Bridget, she didn't get any kind of mercy. Since she was only swung off the ladder, her neck didn't break. So it took several agonizing minutes for her to die slowly by strangulation. Blood had soaked through the hood over her head, pouring from her eyes, on her nose, on her mouth, her body. It convulsed and trashed against the restraints until finally, with one last violent jerk, she was still. And Bridget's body, it was then buried nearby.
Like the initial hearings, the rest of the witch trials followed a predictable pattern. Examinations for the witch's mark, dramatic displays by the afflicted, accusations fueled by grudges, and guilty verdicts based on spectral evidence. The next trials included Sarah Good, Elizabeth Howe, Susanna Martin, Rebecca Nurse, and Sarah Wilds. Sarah Good's trial, after months of misery, was finally held on June 28th. Once from a well-off family, her life crumbled after her father's suicide, losing her inheritance to her stepfather, and after her first husband's death left her in debt. Poverty consumed her. To make things worse, her second husband testified against her. Her infant died in jail, and her 4-year-old daughter, Dorcas, was now imprisoned alone. The Afflicted went all out to secure a conviction. During Sarah Good's trial, one claimed Good stabbed her with a knife, producing a broken blade as evidence. Even though a young man stepped in, saying it was his knife, broken the day before, and he actually produced the other half, it wasn't enough. They were like, nope, we've seen enough. No need for that. Good was found guilty. Susanna Martin and Rebecca Nurse were next tried on June 29th. Susanna was found guilty, but Rebecca was initially acquitted. However, after a quick recess and some words from Chief Justice Stoughton, the jury changed their verdict to guilty. Before the switch, though, they gave Rebecca a chance to explain an unclear answer. But old, exhausted, and hard of hearing, she missed the question, which sealed her fate. Elizabeth Howe and Sarah Wilds were tried on June 30th and both found guilty. On July 19th, all 5 women were taken to Gallows Hill to face the same brutal execution as Bridget Bishop. Before being hanged, Sarah Good told the Reverend, "I am no more a witch than you are a wizard, and if you take my life, God will give you blood to drink." People recalled this 25 years later, when the Reverend died from a hemorrhage and blood pooled in his mouth.
Nice.
Got him!
Yeah, Jesus
she was a witch
Christ.
after all, it turns out.
Yeah, okay. Oh, they were right the whole time.
Bingo.
So the next round of trials, they ran from August 2nd to August 5th in 1692. And it included John and Elizabeth Proctor, John Willard, Martha Carrier, George Senior Jacobs, and Reverend George Burroughs. All 6 were found guilty. However, only 5 were executed on August 19th. This was because Elizabeth Proctor, she was pregnant, and they postponed her execution till after she gave birth. So there was we'll kill her then.
Yeah.
So as the 5 condemned waited to be hanged, they watched in horror as one after the other. They were placed halfway up the ladder and then pushed off. So during this round of executions, public opinion it started to shift when George Burroughs, the last to be hung, he spoke movingly about his innocence. Just before his execution, he recited the Lord's Prayer perfectly, a feat believed impossible for most witches. So this caused rumblings of doubt among the crowd, especially since the Afflicted, they claimed the devil had been prompting him. That's how he got it right, which made no sense because it was the devil who couldn't say it right in the first place.
Yeah.
So the crowd's unease grew, but Cotton Mather, a prominent Boston minister who you mentioned at the beginning, who was also an early instigator in the witch trials, he quelled the unrest by declaring that the devil has often been transformed into an angel of light. Maher, he'd played a key role in fueling the witch trials. He holding a deep belief in witchcraft and supporting the use of spectral evidence, which was clearly it was used throughout the trials. His writings, they included Wonders of the Invisible World. That only intensified the fear and paranoia that gripped Salem.
Yeah, exactly. Cawthon, he wrote a lot about the Salem witch trials after the fact. He wasn't like in there at the start, but he came in at the end. And he's basically one of the reasons I think why he became so famous.
Yeah.
I think
multiple
different books as well. It wasn't just about that. Plus, prior to the witch trial here in Salem, he has been
the one in Boston. The one in 1688.
So like there was that
Goody,
14-year-old girl as well there or whatever. And like he would take her in to study her. And I'm like,
oh yeah, one of you.
When I was reading the story,
yeah. So now let's get to the 4th and the final round of executions. The court of Oyer and Terminer reconvened on September 6th, 1692 to try Giles Corey, Martha Corey, Mary Esty, Alice Parker, Mary Parker, Anne Putitor, Wilmot Reed, Margaret Scott, and Samuel Wardwell. All were found guilty except for Giles Corey, who refused to enter a plea. His decision to not enter a plea was to protect his family's inheritance. If he bleeded and had been convicted, his property would have been forfeited to the state, leaving his family destitute. By staying silent, Corey hoped to prevent this. Unfortunately, under English law, standing mute was punishable by pressing, being crushed under heavy weights until a plea was given. Corey was taken to a location near Salem jail, where a board was pressed onto his chest and stones were added progressively. For 2 days, Giles Corey endured the wait, refusing to enter a plea. He finally died on September 18th, succumbing to his injuries, and his last recorded words were, when asked to plead, his final words were, "More weight." The 8 remaining condemned were carted off to Gallows Hill on September 22nd. This time, though, the mood at the hangings has shifted from anger towards the accused to a more somber sadness. This isn't fun anymore. As the victims pleaded their innocence and said farewell to their families. As the last person was hanged, the Reverend remarked, "What a sad thing it is to see 8 firebrands of hell hanging there."
We'd actually seen when we went in Salem. We went to Salem. We seen where Giles Corey had been hung or had been pressed. Didn't we?
Keith, what an astute point yet again. Let's play that clip. Maybe I can solve it.
When he was before he was killed, he put a curse on Salem town, and anytime something is bad about to happen to the town itself, apparently Giles Corey's spectre or ghost appears. So one of the times was actually when just before the Great Fire of Salem. So there was a number of reports leading up to that of a lot of people start saying that they seen something weird in the graveyard.
Ooh, something spooky, perhaps.
Something spooky. A man appearing, a spectre, a ghost. They seen the ghost of Giles Corey appearing in the graveyard, and then a couple of weeks later, after all these reports.
Classic that chapter clip. Even though public opinion was shifting, accusations continued to flood in on October 29th as witchcraft charges. See, this is the part I love about the story. Yep. It's when witchcraft charges extended to include the governor's wife. That's when Governor... Ooh, okay, guys. This is actually... I know you've killed 20 odd people, but maybe we're taking this a bit seriously.
Put the brakes on, you know?
Let's put the brakes on this. Governor Pipps halted the court of Oyer and Terminer, replacing it with the Superior Court of Judicature, which was instructed to ignore spectral evidence. Trials resumed in early 1693, but of the 56 persons indicted, only 3 were convicted, and they, along with everybody held in custody, had been pardoned by Pipps by May 1693 as the trials came to an end. In total, 19 people were executed, 1 man died under torture, and at least 5 others perished in prison. Over time, individuals involved in the trials expressed regret. One judge publicly acknowledged his guilt, and in 1706, Anne Putnam Jr. apologized for her role as an accuser. In 1702, the General Court declared the trials unlawful. By 1711, 22 of the 33 convicted were exonerated, and £600 was paid to the victims' families. Massachusetts formally apologized in 1957, and in 2001, the last 11 were exonerated. The abuses of the Salem witch trials led to key changes in US court procedures, including the right to legal representation, the ability to cross-examine accusers, and the presumption of innocence. So what do you have to say about that, folks?
It's crazy.
Well, we're going to have a stone you pretty soon. So
Yeah, right, yeah, I'm next.
Yeah, exactly. And I have gotten away with it yet again!
Yeah. I mean, you got me.
I got you to sign my little... I just pinched her. It was really easy. But Salem is actually a place with a bit of a haunted history. Yeah. It's reputedly a very haunted town. So the Salem witch trials, obviously it's become... for a long time the Salem witch trials was a source of...
Shame
for the town of Salem. It's only basically since like Hocus Pocus and this nostalgia of Halloween, it's become like, fairy tale land for Halloween.
You know what? It wasn't that bad. Let's make some money off it.
Exactly. Yeah, it's fine. Make some money off it. Why not?
I do have a couple more stories to add. It's the brutal murder of Captain White.
Ooh.
Which happened on the 6th of April in 1830. He was, by the time he was murdered, he was 82. He was a widower. He had no children or anything like that. But his murder really shook everyone in town because it was pretty brutal, alright? It seems that someone snuck inside the house through a back window, found their way up the stairs into his bedchamber, and then bludgeoned him in the head, and then stabbed him 13 times.
Holy shit.
With a dirk. So the reason behind the death, of course, was none other than money. What else would it be? I mean, come on.
What else?
At the time of his death, Captain White was one of the richest men of Salem, and he lived in a Federalist-style house on Essex Street. It was really pretty.
Yeah.
We have some shots about the house right now, so What a shot!
That was pretty good.
The house, you can visit it today. You can even go to the bedchambers where he died. So it's kind of interesting though to see that. But what I was saying is that, as he had no children, his money was to go to his relatives, to like just trickle down, except if he had a will. And God did he have a will.
Right.
He wanted to leave majority of his wealth to his nephew. But there was this little wee lad who married into the family that Captain White called a gold digger.
Right.
Who were marrying into the family, named Joseph J. Knapp Jr. And he came up with the idea of killing Mr. White and destroying his will. So by destroying the will, there's not gonna be it's gonna come down to them, so he's gonna get a cut of the money, and a lot of money. Right. So he was like, alright, I'm gonna get something out of it. He got his brother into the whole act as well. And not just that, but the two of them then hired a really well-known outlaw, I guess you could call him, Richard Crowninshield, right? Who actually committed the murder itself. So he was the one that stabbed him and bludgeoned him and everything. The brothers then, so all of them were caught. The brothers, they were heard talking about the murder, and then Joseph Knapp was actually found playing with the dirk late after the murder.
The actual murder up in...
The murder up in itself.
What's that? Nothing.
He had known before the murder. So it's kind of like, the fuck are you doing, son? So they were all charged with the murder, but only the Knapp brothers were found guilty because Richard, he committed suicide in jail.
Oh, shit.
And the two brothers were then soon followed. The two brothers later they were hung, so they all got what they deserved anyway. So now by this point you might be thinking that, oh wait, I heard this story before, even though you never heard of this murder. And you are right, because this story made Edgar Allan Poe write Telltale Heart story.
Based on this?
Based on this,
wow, no way.
But don't feel too bad for Captain White, though, because he got some of his riches through the slave trade. So, I mean, you know. So, yeah.
Fuck him, then.
Yeah.
Well, he said.
He got the stories out of him.
Yeah, exactly.
Poe and Hawthorne, but other than that.
All right, so we shall leave it there. Thank you so much for joining myself, producer Regina, and Keith, for this special Halloween episode of the That Chapter podcast. As we finally, Keith, are you satiated? Are you satisfied?
Yeah. No, I don't think so, because I was just thinking we can talk about the Connecticut
Don't
one.
stop, please. Guys, thanks for listening. Ending the podcast now.